I am Theodore, 27 years old. A few months ago, a black plastic lawn bag sitting in my own hallway changed my life forever. I had spent 4 straight years paying every single bill to keep a roof over my family's head. I sacrificed my savings, my social life, and my peace of mind. But on a random Tuesday, after working a grueling 10-hour shift, I walked through the front door to find my bedroom completely dismantled. In the center of my room stood 2 massive golden retrievers. My mother stood in the hallway with her arms crossed, looking at me like I was an inconvenience she had finally decided to deal with. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your room is theirs now. You can use the couch until you figure something else out." She laughed, right in front of my younger brother Julian, who was busy recording his dogs on his phone, as if my displacement was a funny little joke for the internet. But there is one thing they didn't know. They didn't know I had just received a phone call from the regional real estate manager holding our lease. They didn't know I had the legal power to pull the rug out from under their entire fraudulent scheme. And right now, they are sitting in a cramped, miserable apartment, dealing with the devastating reality of paying their own way. Before I tell you exactly how I legally and systematically dismantled their little empire, hit that like button if you believe that true justice always finds a way. And please, let me know where you are watching from down in the comments. Your support means the world to me. Now, let us go back to the moment the illusion shattered. When I opened the front door that afternoon, the very first thing I saw was a stainless steel dog bowl sitting right on top of my tax folder. Not near it, but directly on top of it. The smell of wet fur and bleach hit me like a physical blow. I walked further down the hall, the heavy thud of my work boots masking the sudden, violent hammering of my heart. There were 2 golden retrievers in my room, one rolling on my bare mattress and one circling the makeshift desk where I sat and did the household payroll every single Thursday night. My mother, Eleanor, was standing in the doorway. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, wearing this expression of smug satisfaction, like she had finally corrected a nagging problem she had been forced to tolerate for entirely too long. I stood there paralyzed. I was still clutching the heavy leather handle of my work bag. One of the dogs stepped heavily onto my favorite pillow, the one I had bought to help with the neck pain I got from staring at spreadsheets all day. From the kitchen, I could hear my brother Julian laughing. He was laughing like this was cute, like I was somehow supposed to see the charming viral value in being abruptly replaced by an animal with a chew toy. I had paid every single bill in that house for 4 straight years. I paid the rent, the internet, the electric bill, and the water bill whenever my father inexplicably fell behind. I paid for the groceries when my mother started conveniently calling herself between checks every other month. I was the sole reason we were not facing a lawsuit or an eviction notice. My mother had actually stripped my bed before I even got home from my office. That specific detail stayed with me much longer than the sight of the dogs. The fitted sheet was completely gone. My blue blanket, the one that kept me warm during winters when we couldn't afford to run the heater, was folded into a tight square and shoved unceremoniously into a black lawn bag along with a handful of my work clothes. She didn't even have the basic human decency to use a suitcase. It was just a flimsy plastic lawn bag sitting by the linen closet, making me look like temporary trash that needed to be hauled to the curb. Julian leaned against the kitchen counter, wearing expensive designer sneakers and holding a premium bag of organic dog treats. "They needed space," he said, shrugging his shoulders as if stating a universal fact. "You're barely home anyway." I slowly turned my head and looked at him. Then I looked at the dogs. Then my eyes found the framed family photo my mother had deliberately moved from the entryway table to the very top of my bookshelf. She had placed it right above a massive metal dog crate they had wedged perfectly into the corner where my laundry hamper used to be. In that photo, I was barely visible on the edge, wearing my worn-out work clothes because I had rushed straight from a late shift to make it in time for the picture. Julian was dead center, soaking up the spotlight. "Barely home," I repeated, my voice coming out incredibly flat and hollow. My mother simply lifted one shoulder in a dismissive shrug. "You work. Good for you," she said, her tone dripping with venom. That doesn't mean two dogs should stay crowded in the den all day just because you're territorial. Territorial. I almost burst into hysterical laughter right then and there. The bedroom I had slept in since I was a teenager had been transformed into a literal kennel in a single afternoon, and somehow, in my mother's twisted reality, I was the one being dramatic. I glanced toward the glass door leading to the back porch. My father, Arthur, was out there. He was pretending to be deeply focused on adjusting a loose handle on the barbecue grill cover. He always did that. He always found some random, inanimate object that suddenly required his absolute moral attention whenever he didn't want to be in the room for something ugly. I walked over to the glass and tapped on it. "Did you know?" I asked him. He didn't look at me at first. Finally, he slid the glass door open just a tiny fraction, barely an inch, and muttered, "Your mother said it was temporary." The truly stupid part was that, for half a second, some starved, desperate part of my inner child actually reached out and clung to that word. Temporary. I wanted to believe it, but I knew the truth. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a fit. I just slowly looked at the internet router, its little green light blinking steadily on the shelf by the stairs. I looked at the yellow lease envelope half hidden under a grocery store flyer on the table. I looked at all of it knowing what was coming, because 48 hours later, that yellow piece of paper was going to matter more than anybody in that house could possibly comprehend. To understand how my family justified treating me like a disposable income source, you have to understand how easily devotion can be weaponized. If you have ever been the person holding a broken family together while everyone else just casually called it helping out, you already know exactly how easy it is to completely disappear inside your own usefulness. This whole nightmare didn't start with the golden retrievers. It started 4 years earlier, on a suffocatingly hot afternoon in late August. I had just turned 23 years old. I was working a grueling entry-level salary job doing payroll support for a regional distribution center during the day, and to keep my head above water, I was picking up weekend bookkeeping shifts for a small local contractor. I did this because one job barely covered my basic groceries and a fraction of my student loans, but two jobs made me feel slightly less breakable in a world that was constantly demanding money. My father's hours at his job had been cut again. He blamed management, the economy, the weather, anything but his own work ethic. My mother started casually throwing around the phrase, tight season, like poverty was just an unpredictable weather pattern. She acted like if we all just stood perfectly still and held our breath, the financial storm might pass right over our roof without tearing the shingles off. I remember the exact moment the trap was set. My mother slid a white rent envelope across the kitchen table toward me. She slid it quickly, like it physically embarrassed her to touch it. The corner of the paper was damp from the condensation of her glass of sweet tea. She wouldn't even make eye contact with me. "Just for 1 month," she told me, her voice soft and pleading. "Just until your father gets caught up." The rent was exactly $1,475. I knew precisely what my finances looked like. I had $2,110 sitting in my checking account, a meager $340 in my emergency savings, and an auto draft for my student loan pulling in exactly 6 days. It was financial suicide. But I looked at my mother's anxious hands, and I paid the rent that night anyway. That moment should have felt like a heroic rescue. Instead, as the confirmation screen popped up on my laptop, it felt like crossing a heavy, invisible line that I would never, ever be allowed to walk back over. The very next morning, I found a little note stuck to the refrigerator with a cheap tomato magnet. It was in my mother's handwriting. "Thank you, baby. We'll make it right," it read. But directly underneath that sweet little note, pinned by the exact same tomato magnet, was Julian's online order confirmation. He had used the family credit card to buy a pair of limited edition designer sneakers he claimed he desperately needed for a Labor Day party. The total was $189.92. That was the perfect portrait of my family in a single frame. My hard-earned money was instantly converted into their basic survival, allowing their money to be freely converted into mood, luxury, and aesthetics. I didn't say a single word about the sneakers. That was my biggest blind spot for years. I foolishly mistook staying calm and keeping the peace for staying respected. At first, I really wanted to believe it was temporary. But 1 month seamlessly bled into 3. 3 months quietly calcified into a permanent pattern. My father would swagger into the kitchen, his jaw set in a hard line, and boldly announce that overtime was just about to pick back up. It never did. My mother would stand over the kitchen sink, ripping open past due mail while the water was running, as if the sound of the rushing tap water might somehow soften the terrifying numbers printed on the paper. Julian drifted in and out of the house. He had supposedly drained his college fund on a failed startup idea, so now he was back home, eating our food, using my internet, and offering soft, meaningless apologies while telling elaborate stories about how expensive life was for everybody right now. Meanwhile, I became the central nervous system of that entire house. I built a massive, color-coded spreadsheet to track every single due date. Blue was for utilities, green was for the crushing rent, yellow was for the groceries I bought on my way home from work, and red was for absolutely anything that could shut off, lock us out, or publicly humiliate us. I became intimately acquainted with the financial pulse of the building. I knew the electric bill always spiked in July and August because the ancient air conditioning unit upstairs wheezed like it had emphysema. I knew the water bill would double the second Julian moved back in, because he took 45-minute showers every morning like he was trying to wash away his own failures. I knew exactly how many days I could float the internet bill before the provider tacked on a late fee. 21 days. I knew this because I was the only one paying it. There are deep, physical body memories that don't sound particularly dramatic when you say them out loud, but they haunt you. Like the sharp pinch in my right shoulder from carrying heavy bulk grocery bags up the front porch steps after a 10-hour shift. The red, burning groove my laptop bag left on my shoulder while I hauled gallon jugs of premium laundry detergent, because my mother absolutely insisted on the expensive brand, even though she never seemed to have the money to actually buy it. Or the way my stomach would turn ice cold every single afternoon when I heard the heavy metal lid of the mailbox slam shut outside. It wasn't exactly fear. It was just exhausting recognition. Bills had a specific sound. Dependence had a specific weight. I will never forget one night during that first brutal winter. The central heat died just after midnight. Instead of calling an emergency repair company, my father walked down the hall and knocked on my bedroom door. He didn't call a professional because picking up the phone meant admitting out loud to a stranger that he couldn't afford the service fee. I opened the door and found him standing in the dark hallway, shivering in a thin thermal shirt and jeans, holding a cheap plastic flashlight under his chin. The harsh light made him look incredibly old and terribly small. "You're good with this stuff," he mumbled. He didn't say, "I am so sorry to wake you up." He didn't say, "Thank you for helping." It was just the standard family translation for basic competence. It meant, "Come fix what we cannot pay to fix." I didn't know the first thing about repairing a broken furnace. I was an accountant, not an HVAC technician. But what I did know was exactly who to call, how to sound steady and authoritative on the phone, and, most importantly, which of my credit cards still had enough available balance to survive a massive emergency service fee until my next paycheck cleared on Friday. The technician finally arrived at 2:13 a.m. It was a blown capacitor. The total was $312. I stood barefoot on the freezing kitchen tile, my arms wrapped tightly around my chest to stop myself from shaking, and I paid the invoice directly from my phone. I barely slept that night. By morning, I was standing in the kitchen, pouring coffee I had just brewed for everyone, when my mother's phone rang. It was my Aunt Martha. I listened as my mother put the phone on speaker and proudly announced, "Thank God Arthur handled the heating issue last night before the pipes froze and got worse." She looked right through me as she said it. She completely erased my contribution, my money, and my sleepless night to protect my father's fragile ego. That was a massive shift in my reality. It wasn't the first time I had been forced to pay for their survival. But it was the exact moment I truly understood that they were actively rewriting the narrative while I was still standing right there in the room. Over the next few years, the solid proof of my financial captivity piled up in stupid, mundane household objects. The high-speed internet account was officially in my name because my mother had flaked on 2 installation appointments, and the provider absolutely refused to schedule a third courtesy visit for her. The electric company login and password reset were tied directly to my personal email address. The grocery store loyalty rewards number was my phone number. The emergency plumber's contact info was saved in my phone under House. Do not ignore. My workspace in that bedroom was a pathetic joke. It was an old, hollow-core door I had found in the garage, balanced precariously across 2 dented metal file cabinets I bought at a local school auction. I sat there every Thursday night, auditing the household expenses, with a cheap heating pad pressed against my lower back to ease the spasms. I drank cheap instant coffee from a chipped ceramic mug Julian had bought me for Christmas years ago that said, "World's okayest brother." He had felt sentimental for exactly 48 hours before asking to borrow $50. My mother loved to walk past my room, point a manicured finger at my laptop screen, and sneer, "You've got it so easy, Theodore. You just sit in your room. You just sit." She said it as if the entire house magically ran itself outside the 4 walls of what she perceived as sitting. As if desperately juggling 6 different accounts to keep us from drowning was just some fun little hobby I had picked up because I was naturally fond of numbers. As if my bedroom hadn't completely transformed into a stressful office space and a staging area for their survival. My autonomy didn't vanish in a dramatic explosion. It went quietly, piece by piece. First, they took my disposable income. Then they took my quiet evenings. Then they took the surface of my desk, piling it with their unpaid medical bills and parking tickets. Eventually, they took my basic right to close my own bedroom door without someone immediately knocking to ask if I had seen the gas bill. And finally, they took my fundamental right to just be tired. My mother liked me best when I was highly useful and completely silent. My father liked me best when I somehow made his massive failures look smaller without ever making him feel small. And Julian liked me best when I dutifully acted like his constant, expensive emergencies were just wacky, unavoidable accidents. The boundaries were obliterated. And then the golden retrievers arrived. The dogs didn't invade my life all at once. It was a slow, calculated creep. First, Julian started showing us photos of these beautiful, purebred rescues. Then came the long, dramatic stories about how they needed a stable environment. Then he started bringing them over for brief weekend visits. Suddenly, there were massive, slobbery chew toys scattered by the living room couch. The real warning sign came on a random Tuesday night. I was sitting at my makeshift desk, utterly exhausted, trying to reconcile a bizarre spike in the water bill. My mother walked past my open door, paused, and casually remarked, "You know, those dogs are probably happier in your room anyway." She leaned against the doorframe, admiring the square footage. "You're never in here except to sleep. It's wasted space." I snapped my head up so fast my neck audibly clicked. She immediately laughed, waving her hand in the air like she had only meant to tease me. But I felt a cold chill run down my spine. That is exactly how terrifying. Real things always started in our house. They started as harmless jokes. My mother operated on the deeply toxic belief that if she warned you about her cruelty in a small, playful voice, it somehow completely erased the threat. 3 days before I walked into my room and found the crates, the storm finally made landfall. I was at the office. My coworker, Sarah, was covering the front desk while dealing with a nightmare call from her divorce lawyer. So I had stepped into the quiet concrete stairwell to take an unexpected personal call. It was Ms. Ramirez from the property management leasing office. "Hi, Theodore. I'm just checking in on the annual renewal packet," she said, her tone professional but slightly strained. "And I really need some strict clarification on the pet situation before anything gets officially signed and processed by our real estate division." I frowned, staring through the small glass panel in the heavy fire door. Pet situation? I echoed, my voice echoing slightly in the stairwell. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Yes, Ms. Ramirez said, choosing her words very, very carefully. I was told by your mother that 2 large golden retrievers are now permanently residing in the property. My stomach dropped into my shoes. No one had bothered to tell me that Julian's little pet project had officially left the confines of our house and become a legal liability. I stood there, clutching my cell phone, feeling my pulse begin to beat rapidly high up in my throat. Ms. Ramirez had that incredibly cautious, measured voice that seasoned professionals use when they realize they have accidentally stepped on a landmine in the middle of a messy family situation, and they desperately want no part of the resulting blood spray. I am so sorry, she said quickly when I asked her to repeat the part about the dogs. Your mother dropped off the physical renewal packet yesterday afternoon. She explicitly stated that the pet addendum was already discussed and cleared with you. I stared blankly down at the warehouse floor far below me. I watched men in bright neon reflective vests driving forklifts, moving massive wooden pallets back and forth. Down there, the world was still highly organized, logical, and safe. Up here in the stairwell, my reality was rapidly unraveling. No, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It absolutely wasn't. Another agonizing pause. Then, Ms. Ramirez lowered her voice to a sympathetic whisper. Theodore, your name is listed as the primary financial guarantor on the current lease file. That is the only reason I am calling you directly. That single, terrible sentence instantly changed the entire atmosphere of the stairwell. Up until that exact second, I had still been foolishly thinking about all of this in purely family terms. My room, my mother's nagging, my bills, my lazy brother's dogs. But Ms. Ramirez had just effortlessly dragged the entire messy, toxic swamp of my family dynamics into the freezing cold, unforgiving language of corporate real estate. Liability, guarantor, file, compliance. Ms. Ramirez, I said, forcing my voice to stabilize. I need you to tell me exactly what was submitted in that packet. I rushed back into my private office, pushed the door shut, grabbed a yellow legal pad from my desk drawer, and started writing furiously while she talked. 1 renewal request. 2 unregistered, large breed dogs. A formal household composition change. Projected occupancy, unchanged. Primary guarantor income on file, mine. Attached pay stub, mine. My pen stopped dead on the paper. Wait, I interrupted her. What pay stub? The one from April, she replied, sounding a bit confused. It perfectly matches the employer information in your original supporting documents. April. The blood drained completely from my face. I had printed and handed my mother a physical copy of my April pay stub because she claimed our auto insurance company desperately needed proof of residence after some bizarre rate issue. I vividly remembered that specific piece of paper because the cheap printer at our house had been running terribly low on magenta ink, making my official corporate logo at the top look like a dark, bruised purple. My mother had taken my personal financial document. She had weaponized my hard-earned salary to legally renew the house and move my brother's dogs in. She didn't ask. She didn't hint. She just used me. That was the first massive structural crack in my obedience. It wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It wasn't about toxic family memories. It was paper. It was fraud. Nothing gets signed, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Do not process that file. Ms. Ramirez let out a very small, very audible exhale of relief. I was really hoping you would say that, Theodore, she confessed. Because there is also the rather pressing issue of arrears. I wrote the word down, tracing over the letters twice. Arrears. There was a partial payment submitted last month, she continued. It was exactly $200 short. We temporarily waived the late posting fee simply because of your flawless payment history. My payment history, not our payment history. Mine. I frantically pulled up my secure banking app with my free hand. I felt that dark, familiar, sickening drop in the pit of my stomach. I had transferred the full rental amount directly to my mother's account. Every single cent. I knew it for a fact because I remembered typing a stupid, aggressive little note in the memo field. May rent. Handle it. $200 had simply vanished into thin air between my checking account and the leasing office ledger. I asked Ms. Ramirez to email me the official property ledger immediately. 7 seconds later, the email notification pinged on my screen. I aggressively clicked open the PDF. There it was, documented in black and white. Monthly charges. Pet violation warning draft. Not yet posted. Prior balance adjustment. Payment received. Outstanding amount, $200. And then, down at the very bottom of the page in tiny, innocuous administrative notes, was a single typed sentence that made my hands go completely still. Resident stated co-guarantor son would continue covering household shortfalls. Resident stated, my mother had not only stolen my income documents and skimmed my rent money, she had actively, legally spoken for my financial future. I sat back in my cheap office chair, the springs groaning in the quiet room. I stared at the bright spreadsheet on my monitor, the endless rows of other people's payroll data blurring together for a brief second. My body always did this incredibly strange thing whenever I reached the absolute peak of human anger. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things. I just became incredibly, ruthlessly practical. Very, very exact. I leaned closer to the phone. Ms. Ramirez, I have one more question. If I officially withdraw my name as guarantor right now, what happens? She hesitated, clearly understanding the gravity of the bomb she was about to drop. Then the entire renewal application is immediately reevaluated without your income supporting it. And if the current financial delinquency isn't cured immediately, a formal notice to vacate would issue. How long do they have? I asked. Legally? Depending on their response. Not long at all. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and felt the earth shift beneath my feet. When I finally drove home that evening, I walked into the kitchen and found the physical evidence of their betrayal proudly displayed. Taped to the refrigerator door, right under the cheap tomato magnet, was a freshly printed page. The title read, House Expectations. Not rules. Expectations. That was pure Eleanor. Use a softer corporate title to disguise a choke collar. It listed quiet hours, shared kitchen cleanup duties, mandatory dog feeding times, and near the bottom, written in bold, black text, back bedroom now designated pet sleeping/care space. I read it twice. It was typed, formatted neatly in size 11 Calibri font. That meant premeditation. My mother hadn't just panicked and given my room away in a sudden burst of cruelty. She had plotted it. And then, I saw the open manila folder sitting on the kitchen counter, right next to Julian's dog treats. Inside was the physical copy of the renewal form. I leaned over and read the handwritten occupant notes. In my mother's neat, cursive handwriting, it said, Son may phase out over next term. Younger brother and pets permanent. Heat rushed right up the back of my neck, burning my skin. They were literally planning my exit strategy using my own pristine credit score to secure the launchpad. That night, for the very first time in 4 years, I closed my bedroom door and turned the lock. I didn't go in there to sleep. I went in there to systematically inventory exactly what was still mine before the house started lying about that, too. I sat on the worn carpet with my back pressed firmly against the locked door. My work bag was wide open beside me. Outside in the hallway, Julian's massive dogs paced back and forth, their claws clicking sharply against the hardwood floor like I was an intruder in their newly acquired territory. The air in my room smelled overwhelmingly of cheap dog kibble, my old lavender laundry detergent, and the metallic, sour taste of pure panic in the back of my mouth. I started sorting my life into piles. What was definitively mine, what I had receipts for, what I could definitively prove in a court of law, and what my family would absolutely lie about by sunrise. The practical, financial elements came first, because survival always superseded emotion for me. My laptop, my phone charger, my thick accordion folder containing 4 years of W-2 tax forms, the crumpled envelope holding the $312 furnace repair invoice, the water heater receipt from March, the internet account numbers. Then I created a new folder on my laptop desktop. I titled it with a single word, House. Inside that digital vault, I ruthlessly dragged and dropped every shred of evidence I possessed. The PDF of the lease ledger Ms. Ramirez had emailed me. 11 months of detailed rent payment confirmation numbers from my bank. Screenshots of the utility autopays tied directly to my debit card. The internet contract proving I was the sole account holder. For agonizing years of invisible, unappreciated labor, had left a massive, undeniable paper trail after all. It wasn't the dramatic, cinematic kind of proof. There was no tearful confession tape or notarized villain monologue. It was just solid, unarguable proof that every single time this toxic household inhaled, it had been using my lungs to do it. At around 1 a.m., I was still sitting on the floor, the harsh blue light of the laptop illuminating the dark room, silently printing bank confirmations to my wireless printer. Outside my door, one of the dogs let out a high-pitched whine. Down the hall, I could hear my mother in the kitchen, aggressively clattering dishes into the sink much harder than dishes ever needed to be clattered. She was performing. She was setting the stage for the morning. I picked up my phone and sent a quiet text to my cousin Marcus. "It's happening. I'm pulling the plug tomorrow." Marcus was the only one in the extended family who saw through Eleanor's perfect mother facade. His reply came instantly. "Do it. Burn the bridge and salt the earth, Theo. I've got my couch ready for you." I finally stood up, my knees aching from the floor. I looked around the room. I noticed a bright pink sticky note attached to my vanity mirror in my mother's handwriting. It read, "Please keep door open for airflow." For airflow, as if my private sanctuary had been officially downgraded to an appliance setting. I didn't sleep a wink. By 7:40 a.m., I was fully dressed in my sharpest work clothes. My stomach was completely hollowed out, filled with nothing but black coffee and a cold, heavy dread. Inside my leather briefcase were 2 thick, meticulously organized folders. I unlocked my door and stepped out. Julian was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the hallway, wearing sweatpants, mindlessly scrolling through his phone while one of the dogs slept heavily against his leg. "You're really doing all this?" Julian sneered, not even bothering to look up from his screen. By all this, he clearly meant my completely unreasonable refusal to quietly underwrite the existence of his pets. I didn't say a word. I just stepped right over his legs. In the kitchen, my mother had laid out an absolute masterpiece of manipulation. It was a performance designed specifically to disarm me. Fresh toast, a steaming mug of my favorite coffee. She even had my favorite expensive yogurt sitting perfectly in a ceramic bowl I had bought from Target months ago, back during a brief, foolish period when I actually believed small, nice things could soften the sharp edges of this household. "Theodore, sit down. We need to talk like adults," she said smoothly. I recognized that specific tone immediately. It was a calculated ambush wearing expensive lipstick. I didn't sit. I remained standing, my hand gripping my briefcase. With 2 fingers, she slowly slid the yellow lease envelope across the kitchen island toward me. She did it with this grand, magnanimous gesture, like she was being incredibly generous to allow me to look at the very trap she had built for me. "There," she said, her voice dripping with fake patience. "You want transparency? Read it. Your father and I are just trying to stabilize the house. That's all this is." I reached out and opened the heavy yellow flap. I pulled out the stack of papers, the renewal packet, the pet addendum, the occupant notes declaring my impending departure, my stolen pay stub, but clipped to the very back of the packet was a single, terrifying page I had never seen before. It was a pre-filled guarantor continuation form. My full legal name was typed neatly at the top, but at the bottom, the signature line was completely blank. blank. Any normal person would have felt a rush of relief seeing that they hadn't forged my signature yet. Instead, I felt a violent, freezing snap of pure terror as I realized exactly how dangerously close they were to locking me in a financial cage for another 12 months. My mother completely mistook my stunned silence for hesitation. She moved in for the kill. "You stay on the lease for just one more year," she coaxed, her voice soft and reasonable. "That gives Julian time to get his new business established. It gives your father time to catch up on his debts. And it gives you time to stop acting so incredibly hurt over a simple bedroom. A room." There it was, their absolute favorite magic trick. They loved to shrink the massive, bleeding wound of their exploitation down to the size of some furniture and paint colors, so they would never, ever have to say the terrifying words out loud: ownership, dependence, replacement, labor. My father shuffled in from the back porch. He was wearing his heavy work jacket, even though he wasn't scheduled to leave for another 40 minutes. He refused to sit down at the table. He never sat down when there was an act of moral cowardice that he needed to perform standing up. "I told them we would make it right, Theo," he mumbled, staring intently at the floor tiles. "Told who?" I looked sharply at the kitchen counter. My heart hardened into a block of ice. "Ms. Ramirez called the house last night after she spoke to me, didn't she?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Julian smirked, lifting one shoulder. "Mom handled it." My mother's face hardened, the mask slipping just a fraction. "I told the leasing office there was simply some family confusion, and that you were prone to overreacting," she said smoothly. "She said we could clear the whole thing up today by submitting the final signature." That was the counterblow. She wasn't just trying to beat me to the punch. She had actively started building the legal narrative where I was the unstable, highly emotional, difficult son who couldn't be trusted. If Ms. Ramirez believed her lies, I lost my timing. If the corporate compliance office stamped that file today, I lost all my legal standing. If my mother kept this yellow packet inside the house, I lost my physical proof. For one single, incredibly ugly minute, standing in that suffocating kitchen, I almost folded. I really did. Not because I thought she was right, but because I was so profoundly, bone-deep tired that it was almost easier to imagine signing away another year of my life than to face the apocalyptic fallout of formalizing the break. That is the collapse window. Every victim of family manipulation knows it. I could feel the old, deeply ingrained family training kicking up like dust in my chest. Be useful. Be quiet. Just take the hit. Don't make a scene. My mother saw the hesitation behind my eyes, and she smiled the smallest, most victorious little smile. And that is exactly when she made her fatal mistake. She confidently reached across the island, tapped a manicured fingernail against the blank signature line on the document, and said, "Just sign it, Theodore. Stop being so dramatic. We both know you're not going anywhere. We both know." I looked down at the blank line. I looked at the fancy yogurt bowl I had bought with my own money. I felt the thick utility spreadsheet folded securely in my briefcase. I looked at my father, who still couldn't summon the courage to meet my eyes. I looked down the hall at my brother, happily petting a dog while my bedroom door remained propped open for optimal airflow. And suddenly, something deep inside my chest went perfectly, beautifully still. It was the cleanest, sharpest clarity I had ever felt in my entire life. Without saying a single word, I reached out and took the entire yellow packet, sliding it smoothly into my heavy briefcase. My mother stood up so violently, her heavy wooden chair scraped loudly against the tile. "Put that down." "No, Theodore, that belongs to this house," she snapped. "It belongs to the person you tried to legally obligate with it," I replied, snapping the brass clasps of my briefcase shut. She lunged toward me. Julian jumped up from the hallway. My father finally stepped between us, throwing his hands up. Not brave enough to actually take my side and defend me, just terrified enough to try and slow the explosive scene down. "You can't just walk out of here with that," my mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. If you walk out that door over a dog, do not expect to come back here and claim anything. I looked at her. I really, truly looked at the woman who had birthed me, and for the very first time in 27 years, the palpable, sickening fear filling the room did not belong to me. I'm not claiming anything, I said, my voice steady as a rock. I am ending it. I grabbed my car keys. Behind me, my mother's voice cracked into something incredibly sharp, ugly, and desperate. If you sabotage this lease, Theodore, I swear to God I will tell them you abandoned us, she screamed. I will tell the office you promised to pay. I will tell the police that packet was stolen. My hand tightened around the cool brass of the front doorknob. There it was, the absolute, unfiltered threat at last. She was threatening my legal standing, my narrative, my freedom. I opened the heavy oak door anyway, because by that exact moment, I knew precisely what I had to do before the clock struck noon, and I knew exactly what kind of note I was going to leave on that kitchen counter when the dust finally settled. I walked out of that house with the yellow renewal packet secured inside my leather briefcase, my heart hammering a relentless rhythm against my ribs. I got into my car, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. The morning sun was beating down on the windshield, but I felt freezing cold. My mother's desperate threats were still ringing in my ears. She honestly believed that her words still held power over me. She thought the deep-seated guilt of family obligation would magically pull me back through that front door, making me surrender my salary and my sanity just to keep the peace. She was wrong. The umbilical cord of financial abuse had finally been severed. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the driveway, heading straight for the corporate headquarters of the property management company. Along the way, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Sarah, my coworker. She was dealing with her own brutal divorce and a highly contested custody battle over her kids, so she intimately understood the absolute chaos of legal warfare. Her text simply read, "Take all the time you need today. I covered your morning meetings. Do what you have to do." That text gave me the final push of clarity I needed. People like Sarah were fighting actual, devastating legal battles to protect their children, while I was being treated like a human ATM just to subsidize my adult brother's irresponsible lifestyle. It was exactly 9:06 a.m. when I walked through the heavy glass doors of the leasing office. The air conditioning inside was incredibly sharp and cold. Ms. Ramirez was already waiting for me at the front reception desk. Beside her stood a tall, slim man wearing a navy quarter-zip sweater and reading glasses. He introduced himself as Dean Sterling, the regional real estate portfolio manager. Mr. Sterling had the specific weary look that men get after 20 years of dealing with tenant lies, property damage, and eviction paperwork for a living. He didn't look mean, just completely unimpressed in advance. He was the kind of man who dealt in hard facts, signed contracts, and bank statements, not emotional family theatrics. They did not sit me down in the open lobby. They escorted me directly into a private back office and closed the door. That detail mattered immensely to me. It meant this situation had already escalated past a simple administrative misunderstanding and into the realm of formal record correction and potential fraud. I sat down at the heavy mahogany conference table. Mr. Sterling sat across from me, and Ms. Ramirez sat to his right, her legal pad ready. "Theodore," Mr. Sterling began, folding his hands on the table. "Ms. Ramirez informed me of your phone call yesterday regarding the lease renewal at the Talbot residence. She stated that you are formally contesting the guarantor continuation and the pet addendum submitted by your mother, Eleanor Talbot." "I am not just contesting it," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "I am proving that it was submitted using stolen documentation and deliberate misrepresentation." I popped the brass clasps on my briefcase. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. I pulled out the thick folder I had assembled the night before. I didn't just hand him the yellow packet my mother had tried to force me to sign. I laid my entire life out on that table, piece by piece. First, I handed him the bank confirmations proving I had paid exactly 11 months of rent directly from my checking account. covering the exact amounts that my parents claimed they were paying. Next, I presented the utility autopays, the high-speed internet account contract bearing only my signature, the expensive furnace repair invoice from January, and the water heater receipt from March. Then, I slid the most damning piece of evidence across the polished wood. I handed Mr. Sterling the April pay stub my mother had secretly copied, right alongside a printed email from my company's secure HR portal showing the exact date and time I had originally downloaded it for an entirely different purpose. My mother acted as if she were managing a massive real estate portfolio, unilaterally deciding who gets to live where, I explained, pointing to the printed documents. She felt entirely entitled to my salary, treating my income like it was her own personal inheritance. I did not authorize any renewal submission. I did not approve the pet addendum. And I absolutely did not sign that guarantor continuation form. Mr. Sterling put on his reading glasses and read through the documents in absolute silence. The only sound in the room was the crisp turning of paper. Ms. Ramirez read over his shoulder, her lips tightening into a thin line when she saw the sheer volume of financial burden I had been carrying alone. When Mr. Sterling finally reached the handwritten occupant note inside the yellow packet, the one where my mother had confidently written, "Son may phase out over next term. Younger brother and pets permanent," he stopped. He set the paper down very carefully on the table and looked up at me. "For the official record," Mr. Sterling said, his tone entirely devoid of emotion, "did you consent to your income being utilized in support of this current renewal application? No. Did you make, or authorize anyone else to make, the statement that you would continue covering the household shortfalls? Absolutely not." He nodded once, removed his glasses, and slid a crisp, official-looking form across the table toward me. At the top it read, "Affidavit of Non-Consent." There is a very specific, undeniable sound that paper makes when it stops being messy household paper and officially becomes institutional legal paper. It is cleaner. It is colder. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the line. That was wave 1. By 9:24 a.m., the entire renewal process was completely frozen in their system. My name was permanently flagged and removed from the guarantor continuation file. The pet addendum was instantly rejected pending approved resident financials and a mandatory property inspection. And because the household was currently sitting with an outstanding balance of $200, and there were 2 large, unapproved animals actively residing inside the property, Mr. Sterling generated a formal cure notice right there on the spot. I sat quietly in my chair and watched it slide out of the office printer. It was 3 pages long. It detailed the outstanding financial balance. It cited the unauthorized pet violation. It formally acknowledged my withdrawal as the financial guarantor. And it mandated immediate resident requalification. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the urge to cheer. I just felt an overwhelming, crushing sense of relief. It felt like somebody had finally taken the chaotic, painful reality of my life and translated it into a cold, hard language that my family could no longer interrupt or manipulate. Mr. Sterling clipped the pages together and looked at me for a second longer than was strictly professional. His expression had shifted. It wasn't pity. It was deep, silent recognition. "You have been carrying this place for a very long time, Theodore," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Nobody ever says it counts when you are doing it in real time," I replied. "Well," Mr. Sterling said, tapping the heavy file on his desk, "it ends today." That line landed harder than anything else had all morning. Not because it was poetic, but because it was purely administrative. People like my mother and Julian survive by making your sacrifices feel informal, unprovable, and easily reversible. Mr. Sterling had just done the exact opposite. He had legally put an end date on their exploitation. Ms. Ramirez looked at me sympathetically. "Do you want us to mail this notice to the property? Or would you prefer a same-day posting on the front door?" "Same day," I said without hesitation. "We will have our maintenance coordinator post it this afternoon," she confirmed. I took a deep breath. Can I be there when you do it? Mr. Sterling answered instead of her, his voice firm. Yes, you absolutely can. That was wave 2. I wasn't just going to freeze the corporate file and walk away quietly into the night. I was going to personally witness the correction of the record inside that house. I went back to my office and worked for 3 solid hours because apparently I am exactly the kind of person who can formalize the collapse of his own family and still diligently answer payroll emails before lunch break. At exactly 12:47 p.m., my cell phone rang. It was Ms. Ramirez. We are on our way to the property, she said. I met them at the house 15 minutes later. I pulled up and parked on the street. Mr. Sterling had come personally. He was accompanied by a burly maintenance coordinator named Greg, who was carrying a heavy metal clipboard and a digital camera. Unapproved pet documentation required mandatory photographic evidence. The entire situation would have felt completely absurd if it hadn't been my actual, lived reality. As we walked up the concrete driveway, the front door swung open before we even reached the porch steps. My mother must have been watching through the blinds, panicking when she saw the marked corporate vehicle pull up. She stepped out onto the porch, instantly plastering on her fake, charming, neighborhood watch smile, clearly intending to completely disarm whatever situation was walking toward her. Then she saw me walking quietly right behind them. Her fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Her eyes darted from my face to the thick stack of papers in Mr. Sterling's hand. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, trying to inject her usual authority into her voice, though it trembled noticeably. Mr. Sterling did not step inside the house. He stayed firmly on the threshold, which somehow made the interaction infinitely worse for her. He wasn't a guest. He was an official representative of reality. Mrs. Talbot, Mr. Sterling said, using her formal last name, a name she always wore like a badge of moral superiority. I am here to officially post a cure notice and to actively document a severe file discrepancy regarding the unauthorized use of a guarantor, as well as the presence of unapproved pets on the premises. My mother's eyes flew back to me, wide with furious disbelief. You actually called them? She hissed, dropping all pretense. Mr. Sterling answered before I even had the chance to open my mouth. Theodore provided extensive legal documentation. We thoroughly verified it. There is a very specific, suffocating kind of silence that families make when their elaborate lies are forced to leave the house because a stranger is standing right there holding the receipts. My father shuffled up behind her in the entryway, still wearing his work shirt, his face already drained of all color. Down the hallway, Julian emerged from my former bedroom. His girlfriend, Chloe, who had apparently come over to admire the dogs and eat our food, was standing right behind him. Julian was holding one of the golden retrievers by the collar, looking far more annoyed than actually scared. He still foolishly believed this was a situation that could be fixed with a little bit of attitude and some smooth talking. Relax, it's just some corporate paperwork, Julian scoffed, rolling his eyes at Mr. Sterling. Greg, the maintenance coordinator, silently lifted his digital camera and snapped a bright flash photo of Julian and the dog. It is now, Greg said gruffly. That was wave 3, the absolute public unmasking. It wasn't a massive crowd, but an office manager, a regional director, a maintenance worker with a time-stamped camera, and Julian's girlfriend were more than enough. My mother started talking entirely too fast, her hands fluttering in the air. This is all just a massive misunderstanding. My son lives here. He helps out occasionally. Families combine their finances all the time. He's just throwing a childish tantrum over a bedroom. Mr. Sterling extended his arm and firmly handed her the thick cure notice. He may reside here currently, Mr. Sterling said evenly, his voice cutting through her panic like a sharp knife. But he is no longer recognized as the financial guarantor on this lease file, effective immediately. Any further unauthorized use of his income documentation or any false representation of his financial consent will absolutely constitute legal misrepresentation and potential fraud. My father slowly reached out and took the packet from my mother's trembling hands. He read the first page. His hands were shaking so hard that the crisp paper rattled audibly in the quiet entryway. "How much time do we actually have?" my father asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The outstanding financial balance must be entirely cured by Friday," Mr. Sterling replied with cold precision. "Complete resident requalification documents, demonstrating sufficient independent income, must be submitted by close of business on Monday. Furthermore, the pets must either be officially approved under compliant file terms, with the required deposits paid, or permanently removed from the property. Otherwise, the lease renewal does not proceed, and eviction protocols will commence." My mother rounded on me then. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, vicious hatred. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You would really do this to your own family over a room?" I had been waiting for that exact line. So had my body, apparently, because all the residual heat, all the anger, and all the fear went out of me all at once. I felt perfectly, incredibly calm. "No," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "I did this over 4 years." She opened her mouth to scream at me, but there was nowhere for her to put that anger anymore. The audience wasn't buying it. Greg stepped past her, moving just far enough inside the house to photograph the massive metal crates, the stainless steel water bowls, the dog bedding spread across my bedroom floor, and my absolute favorite part of the entire day, the typed house expectations sheet still sitting right there on the kitchen island where I had left it. That sheet of paper was the ultimate exhibit. My mother had literally manufactured the very evidence of her own extortion. While Greg finished the documentation, I walked calmly past my stunned family and headed straight for the kitchen table. I reached behind the small decorative plant and unplugged the internet modem. Julian blinked, finally dropping the dog's collar. "What the hell are you doing, Theo?" I picked up the heavy black router and wrapped the power cord tightly around it. "I am taking my personal account with me." "You can't just do that," my mother snapped, lunging forward. "I already did," I replied. At that exact second, the wireless icon on Julian's phone dropped. The smart speaker on the kitchen counter gave a confused, sad little chime, and the large flat-screen TV in the den went completely black, displaying a spinning buffering wheel. It was a tiny, brilliant, beautiful moment of immediate consequence. I opened my briefcase, pulled out a single, blank sheet of printer paper, and laid it flat on the kitchen island. I clicked my pen and wrote in large, unmistakable block letters, because I didn't want anyone pretending later that they couldn't read my handwriting or understand my intent. As of today, I am no longer paying this house's rent, internet, utilities, or shortfalls. Do not use my name, my pay stubs, or my accounts for any file, lease, or payment ever again. You wanted my room for the dogs. Good luck with rent. I signed my name firmly at the bottom just once. It wasn't a long, theatrical speech. It was just the undeniable truth. My father stared down at the note like he expected the ink to magically change if he stared at it long enough. My mother refused to even look at it. Julian finally said the only genuinely honest thing he had earned all day. "You're serious?" I used 2 fingers to slide the note a little closer to them across the counter, the exact same dismissive way my mother used to slide the crushing utility bills toward me every month. "Yes," I said. I picked up my briefcase, tucked the router under my arm, grabbed the lawn bag containing my blue blanket, and picked up the only framed photograph from my room that had never made it onto their prestigious living room walls. It was a picture of me and my grandfather. When I stepped back out onto the front porch, Mr. Sterling actually moved aside to make room for me. It wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a profound gesture of professional acknowledgement. Behind me, from deep inside the house, my mother finally called my name. "Theodore," she cried out. She used the desperate, pleading tone she always utilized when she foolishly thought she was still in time to stop a disaster. I didn't turn around. I didn't hesitate. By then, the room understood the reality of the situation. So did the official corporate record. and so did I. I slept that first night in a tiny, sparsely furnished studio apartment located directly over a loud locksmith shop, just 3 blocks away from my corporate office. The mattress was incredibly cheap and way too soft. The mini fridge in the corner aggressively rattled and hummed every 20 minutes, and the flimsy window blinds let in a harsh, bright stripe of orange parking lot light that landed right across my throat. By all standard metrics, I should have absolutely hated it. It was a massive downgrade from the suburban house I had been living in. Instead, I kept waking up throughout the night feeling this strange, buoyant, empty relief. It is the exact physical sensation you get right after you finally put down a massive, crushing weight that you have been carrying for miles, and your body doesn't quite know what to do with its own newly freed shape. There was no barking. There were no aggressive sighs from the hallway. Nobody was slamming dishes into the sink way too hard just for the dramatic effect. And most importantly, there was absolutely no one calling me difficult for simply reacting to the terrible things they had actually done to me. At 8:12 a.m. the next morning, Ms. Ramirez officially emailed me a secure PDF copy of the updated lease record. It read, "Primary guarantor removed. Renewal status suspended pending resident requalification. Unauthorized pet notice active." It was just a simple, unglamorous PDF document. Black text, a gray header, and the property management logo sitting in the top corner. There was nothing inherently dramatic about it, but I sat at my small kitchen table and read it 3 times anyway. It was a changed record. It was my freedom documented in black and white, and that mattered infinitely more to me than I ever thought it could. By Friday afternoon, the reality of the situation had fully breached the walls of my family's house, and my mother sent me exactly 6 text messages in rapid succession. Not a single one of them contained the word sorry. She aggressively asked for the Wi-Fi password back first, which honestly told me absolutely everything I ever needed to know about her twisted emotional hierarchy. Then, she asked how I could sleep at night knowing I was letting strangers push my own flesh and blood out into the cold street. By text number 4, she had completely moved on to shifting the blame, claiming this was all a massive misunderstanding that I had blown out of proportion. By text 5, she was suddenly weaponizing my father's health, talking about how his blood pressure was spiking and hinting darkly about medical emergencies and funerals. By the 6th and final text, she bitterly declared that I was simply proving what she had always known. I had always wanted to abandon them, and I was just looking for a convenient excuse to leave them behind. I didn't answer a single one of them. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. I could have easily fired back a massive paragraph. I could have threatened a lawsuit for the attempted fraud. But engaging with her would only give her the emotional supply she was desperately craving. I did, however, answer my father exactly 2 days later, because his message was only 7 words long. I should have stopped this years ago. That was it. There was no grand speech, no pathetic request for money, and no flimsy defense of his wife's actions. I stared at that text message for a very long time, watching the cursor blink on my screen. I thought about the broken furnace. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had poured into a house I didn't own. I finally typed back, "You should have." He didn't reply. He knew there was nothing left to say. The consequences hit them hard and fast. Julian lasted exactly 3 more weeks in that house. That is what my cousin Marcus told me when he called one evening. Marcus and I had grabbed beers the week before, and he was thoroughly enjoying watching the fallout from a safe distance. Families always use bizarre errands when they want to deliver major news without officially admitting they are gossiping. Marcus called claiming he needed advice on a 401k rollover, but quickly pivoted to the real update. Julian's pathetic excuse about needing to rebuild his college fund was officially dead. Without my internet to stream his games and without my groceries to eat, the reality of his unemployment crashed down on him. His girlfriend, Chloe, realizing that the wealthy, misunderstood entrepreneur persona was actually entirely funded by his older brother, abruptly packed her bags and left him. Julian and his massive golden retrievers were forced to scramble. He ended up moving into a cramped, chaotic house share with 3 other guys in Murfreesboro. My mother desperately tried to keep the illusion alive. She tried to maintain the house for another month, desperately hoping I would cave. But without my pristine income on the management file, and without the quiet, consistent bleed of my autopays covering the utilities, the brutal numbers simply stopped pretending for her. Reality collected its due. They were officially priced out. They couldn't qualify for the renewal. By the middle of the summer, my parents were forced to downsize drastically. They moved into a miserable, poorly insulated 2-bedroom rental situated right off the incredibly loud and congested Nolensville Pike. There was no charming front porch swing. There was no lush, fenced-in backyard to brag about to the neighbors. There was absolutely no extra room to selfishly redesign for somebody else's pets. I didn't view their downfall as malicious revenge. It wasn't vengeance. It was simply subtraction. The house had only ever looked wealthy, stable, and secure because I was standing quietly inside it, holding up the pillars with my own bare hands. Once I stepped away, the entire structure collapsed under its own weight. As for me, the trajectory of my life went in the exact opposite direction. In August, I finally signed a permanent lease on a fantastic 1-bedroom apartment across town. My new landlord, Mr. Henderson, was a retired veteran who shook my hand firmly and respected my privacy. The apartment was a modest place on the top floor. The water pressure in the shower wasn't the greatest, and the stairs were a workout, but it had a heavy, solid deadbolt lock on the front door that worked perfectly every single time I turned the key. I bought my own brand new router. I set up the high-speed internet strictly in my own name, for my own comfortable couch and my own quiet walls. I unpacked my clothes and hung the worn gray sweatshirt, the one Julian's dog had been wearing like a joke, back in my closet, knowing with absolute certainty that no animal or entitled sibling could ever lay claim to it again. I finally secured a massive promotion at my accounting firm, heavily boosting my salary now that my mental energy wasn't entirely consumed by managing my family's manufactured crises. The very first thing I hung on the wall of my new living room wasn't an expensive piece of art, a mirror, or a television. It was a simple, white envelope frame. Inside that frame, I carefully placed a printed copy of that final lease correction email from Ms. Ramirez, the one confirming my removal as the guarantor. I didn't frame it because it was a beautiful document. I framed it because I wanted one plain, undeniable, daily reminder that I had not imagined any of the abuse. I needed to see the physical proof that I had fought for my freedom, and that I had won. That framed piece of paper made the entire apartment truly mine long before any of the new furniture ever did. Marcus came over one Saturday evening a few weeks after I moved in. He brought bags of spicy Thai takeout and a small, resilient fern plant to celebrate the promotion. We sat right there on my living room floor, eating noodles straight out of the cardboard cartons because I still hadn't gotten around to buying a proper dining room table. Marcus took a sip of his beer, looked around the empty, peaceful room, and smiled. "It is incredibly quiet in here, Theo," he said. I remember I laughed a little bit at that observation. Not because it was funny, but because I had spent so many exhausting years of my life mistakenly thinking that true peace would feel much larger, much louder, and much more cinematic. Didn't. True peace just felt like having enough electrical outlet space to charge my phone. It felt like wiping down incredibly clean kitchen counters that nobody else had trashed. It felt like opening the mail and seeing bills that actually matched the specific account they were being drawn from. Most importantly, it felt like having a front door that no one could ever open without knocking and waiting for my permission. That was absolutely all it was. And for the very first time in my life, it was everything I needed. Thank you so much for staying with me through this incredible journey. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please tell me where you are listening from, or just type the words, "still here" down in the comments so I know that my story landed somewhere human and somewhere safe. I want you to remember this, especially if you are the one carrying the heavy load for people who refuse to carry themselves. You were never, ever meant to earn your rightful place in a family by constantly overpaying for their conditional love. Some houses do not actually fall apart when you finally decide to pack your bags and leave them. They simply lose the one person who was desperately keeping the lights looking steady and bright. And if this story hits something old and painful inside of you, I truly hope you find the courage to keep the part of yourself that finally recognizes the vital difference between helping someone survive and letting them destroy you. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own future? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong.